Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor. And for the last several weeks, I've been warning about some unsettling feelings we Americans have about some foundations of our nation that don't quite seem as locked in and concrete and reliable as they used to be. I'm talking about our justice system as we see it play out in a very unfair way. And also, as we've been saying for months now, our election system. We don't care who wins or loses. Well, we do care who wins, but we want to make sure that every American, when walking away after Election Day, feels confident that at least it was done fair and square. Both of these rock solid institutions, something that we used to brag about around the world, are now incredibly shaky. Joining us right now is a man who knows a little something about both of them, Ken Cuccinelli, former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security and also now the Senior Fellow for the Center for Renewing America. Thanks for joining us, Ken.
Good to be with you, Larry.
Listen, I know that you're focusing a lot on election integrity right now, and we've got primaries going on in Virginia for their off-year elections, and we're ramping up to the big primary season for next year. Are we better off now than we were a year or two ago?
Overall, we are, yes. There are a couple of states like Michigan where we've taken steps backwards, but in most states where there have been changes, we have made improvements. Georgia, even New Jersey, we got some decent transparency legislation. Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas, Arizona. So a lot of swing states have made improvements in addition to just pure red states like Texas. And now Florida is a red state. It's typically been thought of as a swing state, but so the answer is yes, we are better off. We have a long way to go, but
Hmm.
we're much better off than we were. I'll give you one example. About half the states have now banned Zuckerbucks, these private dollars that fund election offices that favor Democrats. That really, by itself, was enough to flip the Biden Trump election in 2020 with the money sent into big cities, and for which Mark Zuckerberg got a tax deduction. So, and a lot of those Zuckerbucks bans have been bipartisan. So much of election operation, when it runs well, it really isn't very partisan. It's become partisan because the left has a real interest in mucking
What do
things
you
up.
make of the current trend right now, where Republicans have been complaining and shouting from the rooftops about the lack of integrity in some of the early voting processes, the rampant ballot drop-off boxes, and the mail-in ballots, and even ballot harvesting in the states where it is legal. But now it seems the message is, well, if those laws aren't change them, then we got to join them, right? And but are we actually festering the problem here? Are we contributing to the problem with this newfound, okay, if you're going to cheat, we're going to cheat? I mean, I'm not saying we're cheating, but we're utilizing those exact same methods that we've
Yes.
been complaining about.
Well, look, Larry, the way I've said it is, you know Virginia well as I do. We have a 45-day election. That's ridiculous. There's no reason for that, and it's very difficult to police. Well, if we want to get rid of early voting, beat them at early voting. They'll enthusiastically join us to get rid of early voting. The radical left doesn't have principles. This is all about power to them.
I
So,
see.
yes, I do think we should use every legal tool available to us and beat them with those tools. Then come back and get rid of the egregious ones. Get rid of a 45-day election. Get rid of mailing out ballots or applications all over the place. Clean up voter rolls, require voter ID, those kinds of things. So I don't think we should stop pushing for the improvements, but we should
Yeah.
beat the other side with every tool
If I could
available.
ask you to put your former attorney general hat on for a moment and talk about our judicial system right now, because, and this actually relates to election integrity. We've got the Durham report. We know that the Russian collusion hoax was completely fake and made up by Hillary Clinton's election campaign.
Right.
But they didn't get punished for it at all. They got a slap on the wrist and a fine from the FEC. You look at what the Hillary Clinton for President campaign was able to do and the DNC was able to do with the Steele dossier and what turned into the Russian collusion hoax that paralyzed President Trump during his time in the White House. And there's really no repercussions for it.
Well, I wouldn't go all the way to saying it was paralyzing, but it was certainly a distraction. And you're right, with the exception of Sussman, who went to trial but was acquitted. in a
Hmm.
big city with a big city jury, which unfortunately has become a real issue of where you bring these trials because of the jury pools and their partisan makeup. That really is unprecedented in terms of uh, a campaign hoaxing a whole country and
Yeah.
then carrying it forward and having the law enforcement arms of that country, our country, carry the ball for them, carry the water for them. It was outrageous. It's why people are talking about stripping the FBI and the Department of Justice down to the ground and rebuilding them as something shockingly objective that does law enforcement. What a concept. And they have embarrassed themselves at the leadership level. Chris Wray has never reined that in, and he's of course appointed there by Trump. But um, that all has to end. And I've never seen anything like it, even at the local level, other than Soros prosecutors, but never the whole law enforcement organization like this. Not in yours and my
As
lifetime.
a Republican and a former attorney general and an elected official, I'd love for you to sort of analyze where things are in the Republican field. Setting aside Chris Christie, it seems like all the other candidates have promised and said that there is something very broken with the DOJ and the FBI. And when they get in there, they're going to do some form of reformation or cleaning house. Who do you think is making the most compelling argument in that regard?
Well, I certainly think Governor DeSantis is. He's the only person in the country to remove a Soros prosecutor. He's literally the only person in the field with a track record of doing what they're talking about doing. He was also himself a prosecutor, both in the Navy and a federal prosecutor. So he knows this system. He's worked within it. He was effective. He is the chief law enforcement officer of Florida, and in that capacity has actually brought crime to its lowest level in Florida in 50 years. So he's got all the credentials to do this, and nobody else does. Literally, nobody else does. And the president
Well,
says, "Oh, I'll fix it all in 6 months." Look, I was there for a year and a half of the Trump administration, and it's his own appointees were typically getting in the way of these sorts of accomplishments. If he didn't do it in 4 years, he's not going to do it in the next four. So let's get somebody who can bring America's law enforcement to heel and get us back to objective professional law enforcement that protects Americans instead of is out to get half
are
of
you
us.
concerned? We only have about a minute left. Are you concerned that Republicans are now using rhetoric almost like defund the FBI and said, "Man, FBI law enforcement's always sort of been our wheelhouse. We love law enforcement," and now it's a little upsetting or unsettling for Republicans to be so adamant against them.
So, Larry, I don't hear any of that kind of rhetoric. I think they're being much more surgical about it. None of the rhetoric you hear aimed at DOJ and FBI, for instance, would apply to local police, to police and law enforcement in their home states, nor
Yeah.
should it, because there's no evidence of that sort of behavior that I know of with the kind of scale that has gone on in the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So I think the language is appropriately targeted to DOJ and FBI, and I look forward to seeing a Republican president, probably most effectively President DeSantis, actually fix the
Yeah, there is
problem.
something about having that kind of power and a badge and law enforcement in Washington, D.C., that is an inherently a political town, which lends itself for those powers to be politicized. Ken Cuccinelli, thanks for joining us. More to come here on O'Connor Tonight.